Okay, so welcome everybody. And Dory will be letting people in as they, unfortunately, we have to deal with the waiting room. So I'm going to chit chat for a bit before we get too far into this so people have a chance to join. Yeah, I just want to say thank you for everybody for joining us. And I don't see anybody who's using a phone line. So one of the new tricks I learned for Zoom is that you should describe yourself for anybody who's on the phone or can't see via video. But I see we are still getting people joining, but nobody seems to be unable to use video. If you have an issue with that, say so in the chat and we'll be happy to do some identification. But in any case, we are here today because I have been working on issues around higher ed and college viability with Gary Stocker. The way this got going is actually Gary and I met on LinkedIn, and because I was writing, and actually I'm going to put the article I wrote about this into the chat. So both Gary and I have a passion for small liberal arts colleges, and we noticed that back in May we were both writing about how colleges should basically with the COVID crisis, but even before that, there's a lot of issues in terms of college viability, and I learned that from my own experience as the provost at Menlo College. We had a lot of issues around enrollment, discount rates, how to manage, the admissions for international students, just a whole series of issues we were working around. And so when I left Menlo College 2 years ago and started to go into consulting, I really just spent a lot of time learning about what was going on with the higher ed industry more broadly, what was going on with educational technology, what was going on with financial situations, watching small colleges around the country having to close, and realized that there are, I was seeing too much doom and gloom, basically, in from the higher ed pundits and so on, seeing, oh, we're going to have 500 colleges close, and that just accelerated with COVID. And so Gary and I started talking about ways we could help colleges develop alliances and also use innovative techniques to actually be able to survive what's happening right now. And so we've come up with a whole, if you look at the article, we've come up with a whole series of things we think can happen. But one of the things, so we connected with Jeff and Dory also on LinkedIn, but it's not just Jeff, there's been a whole movement within higher ed to use the Agile approach for things like strategic planning, but to also create more transparency, to create a more student-centered approach by bringing in all stakeholders to the decision-making processes, and just to be able to be more innovative. And so I asked Jeff to help us out to understand what Agile is. So it's so funny because I talked to a lot of people in the business world, and I mentioned Agile, and it's what's another funny thing you'll find, Jeff, is over the last few weeks, I have run into connected with several people who are also Agile coaches, and of course they're all working in the business world. And the reason this has taken off in the business world is because there's a recognition that, and has been for a while, you guys have been working in this arena for a while, that decision-making processes need to be more flexible, actually able to adjust and so on. So I'm going to let Jeff explain all of that. But we think that this can be a tool we can use not only for strategic planning, but just broader decision-making in the higher ed space as we make this transition into the COVID world and post-COVID world, where there's going to be a lot of issues around finances. How do we make the decisions around, if consolidation is going to happen, if we're going to develop alliances, which we think is the way forward to save small colleges, then we think that we really need to start using some decision-making processes that allow us to be more effective. So I'm going to pass it off to Jeff. Actually, before I pass it off to Jeff, I do want to mention Gary has been working on his college viability app, and if you want more information on that, we'll send it. Actually, we'll send it around to those who signed up for the webinar. Gary would have been here to talk about the financial side of things. He's much better at that than I am. So I'm not going to try to cover that too much, but I will mention that Gary's been doing a lot of research on college viability and ways that really to try and understand and being able to benchmark and compare different institutions to each other so that we understand, okay, where are the pressure points, where are the pain points, what's happening with endowments, what's happening with cash flow, what's happening with discount rates and graduation rates. And as we know, graduation rates are critical and retention is critical, because if we're, how fast we're getting students out, and if we're getting them out at all, and also, are we retaining students, and what are those retention rates can be important for financial reasons. Obviously, if every student you retain, it gives you more in your budget and is less costly than having to enroll or recruit more students in the admissions process. So anyway, with that, I'm going to pass it off to Jeff Burstein, who is joining us today from IQ4Agile, and go ahead.
Well, thank you so much, Terry. I really appreciate you hosting us and giving us an opportunity to share some of the work that we've been doing. And you're right, as you mentioned, for the last 20 years, while it started with a movement to work on better ways of delivering software to our customers, in a much more efficient manner, agility has really gone ahead and expanded out through the entire business world. For the last 5 years or so, we've seen a big movement towards business agility, leveraging and scaling a lot of the approaches that have led to the ability to identify and eliminate waste, to be more adaptive to ever-changing circumstances, to kind of switch our focus from a profit-driven model to one that is really more focused on delighting our customer. And we've seen over the last years that it has really allowed for, the birth and growth of companies like Spotify and Amazon and Google, which came out of nowhere. 20 years ago, most of those companies didn't exist, and now they are the Goliaths in pretty much most industries that they choose to go ahead and compete in. Why? Because their approach and their style towards the way that they do their work and who they are and their mindset is one that lends itself towards, iteratively and incrementally learning more about our problems, and ultimately resulting in a higher quality and, a product that really lands very well on what the customer really truly wants. And, when we go ahead and now fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, when I started getting involved in the, conversation around education and some of the challenges they were facing, I really quickly came to the realization that the language of software development probably would not work well within the educational sector. And so I did get together with some people that I know, Agile coaches, some of whom, might be on the call, some of them Terry might have met, and some of them hopefully we'll all get to meet sometime in the future. And, we basically started with a mission. And the mission is simple. We're simply looking to bring the mindset and philosophy along with the practices of agility to the educational sector. Right, we're looking to provide students, faculty, staff, institutions, and even going beyond if we end up in these alliances where we have multiple institutions working together. We're looking to provide them the same level of coaching, training, and structure that has been available to the business world for the last 20 years. Allowing them to shift from a traditional model to an educational model that really is centered around the student and their educational journey. Our essential goal is to really enable educational systems which are built on 5 core values. And those values are collaboration, transparency, integrity, adaptability, and an openness to possibility, all with the intent of focusing on the delivery of the most amount of value that we can just for our students. So what I'd like to do is I'd kind of like to share and walk you through a high-level overview of the framework that we've put together. It's the Learning and Educational Agile Framework, which is a scaling framework that is really intended and designed to meet the mission and to help educational leaders go ahead and pivot and really be more adaptive in their strategic planning, allowing them to go ahead and identify and eliminate waste by simply looking at a new way of doing work. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know when you can see it.
Okay, we're good.
We see it.
Okay, excellent. So as with all scaling Agile frameworks, one of the first things that we did is we looked to build our pillars. The pillars of any Agile framework are really designed to help the organization maybe gear itself towards potential teaming strategies, and also to identify the things that are core and essential to the success for any future and ongoing transformation. We've identified these core pillars as student agility and lean agile leadership. And we'll go into a little bit more about what lean agile leadership and the potential that is really unlocked by invoking our agile mindset and bringing it to the work of transformation. We've also included teaching agility and institutional agility to kind of round out the full services that would go ahead and support a student-centered educational institution. And we've actually put the student, we surrounded them with the learning cycle. We've seen the value of the experimental model, and we leverage it very highly in agility, and we believe that it is a key for students to unlock their meaningful education. When we talk about lean agile leadership, we're talking about leaders who are able to go ahead and lead by example. They go ahead and they manifest the mindsets and principles of the Agile manifestos that we're working with. And ultimately, they are out there leading the change. When we talk about lean agile leadership, we're talking about the switch from a fixed mindset to a growth-oriented mindset. One which understands the value of the decentralization of decision-making, and one that allows for the maintenance of variability over time in order to end up at a better result at the end of the days. When we're talking about, education, we're talking about an opportunity for leaders to go ahead and build cross-functional teams that focus and are aligned around the delivery of very specific value to the student body, whether that's anything from attracting the student to the college or university in the first place, to everything that we would need to bring a student on into their first year of education and help guide them through the rest of their higher educational journey. We have it within the LEAF framework. We have gone ahead and put together a student-centered value delivery system. It is a system which operates with 4 primary roles. Those roles include a team lead operating at each level of the organization to ensure that the teams that are operating have everything that they need to be successful. Someone who is representing the vision of leadership, so someone who is there to speak to ensure that the work that we are doing aligns with the vision of the college, of the higher educational institution in the first place, and that it is indeed the right work to be doing. And then we have the role of student advocate at each level of the organization, ensuring that when we are doing the work and when the teams are out there executing the plan, the vision, in order to go ahead and deliver value to our students, whatever that value may be, whether it's housing, whether it's curriculum, whether it's just the experience of being a student in the new world of the COVID pandemic, when we are losing out on so much, but still having the wherewithal to create teams who focus on ensuring that students still have that capability and that ability to gain the relationships that are so valuable that we get when we're in our higher education. We have 6 practices, all that begin with refinement. Refinement is the practice, the agile practice of understanding our work, getting it from an idea to a funnel, through an approval process so that we can deal with all of our governance, budgeting, scheduling, prioritization, and then feeding that down through the levels of the organization as we take those big vision or organizational initiatives and break them down into smaller and smaller pieces till we get to the level where we have faculty and staff actually executing on the plan of our leaders. Once we move through refinement, we actually go into a planning opportunity, and then we continue to move through the 6 practices, which include how we structure our teams, to how we validate that we're moving in the right direction, and ensuring that what is being worked on is actually delivering the value that we are looking for. Finally, ending up with an opportunity to reflect and improve on the process, which is an essential aspect of every Agile transformation, is the idea of relentlessly committing to improving the way that we deliver value, in this case to our student body. One of the things that truly makes the LEAF system so unique is it is actually the only scaled Agile framework which includes a transformation system. This system is specifically designed to help educational leadership and guide them through the process of a transformation. Traditionally, what you'll see in the business world or in the government sector is you'll see roadmaps. And these roadmaps will traditionally involve things like taking lots of classes and getting lots of certifications and bringing in qualified consultants to go ahead and essentially rack up hours upon hours as you learn how to become a more agile, organization. But with the transformation system, it is actually a system that is intended to guide you through the process of transformation, outlining the key steps along the way, so that as an organization, you can effectively identify the partners to work with and selectively bring in the consultants who can help bring in solutions that might not be available to you as an organization, as you are traditionally too close to the problem. I think it's a really interesting quote. When I talk about transformation systems and the need and ability to transform, I'm often reminded of the quote by Edward Deming, where he says that a person in an organization must have goals. They must take actions to achieve those goals. They must gather the evidence of that achievement, whether it's a success or failure. They must study and reflect on the data, and from that, they must take actions again. It is a repeatable process of going out, plan, do, check, and adjust as we iterate and increment through towards finding solutions that ultimately serve our student bodies. So we ask ourselves, when is the right time for a transformation? And if we look traditionally at business, there's really rarely been a wrong time for transformation. If Gary was here, we'd ask him to maybe bring up the app right now and kind of walk us through some of the analysis that he has seen and that has been produced by college viability. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at your enrollments and your revenue numbers and they're trending down, or if you're looking at your overall operating costs and they're trending up, right? Or you happen to be operating in an ever-changing environment like, I don't know, a pandemic, bringing in the skills from a proven approach that has over the last 20 years within the business world, within the government, probably the last 7 or 8, agility has proven time and time again that there is so much power in the agile mindset, in the being of agile. and that all that's really needed for any sector or industry, which can't fit into the traditional, lean manufacturing or software manufacturing, if they simply have something that's put together in their terminology to support their context, something along the lines of a learning and educational agile framework, then now we'll find ourselves in a situation where there's now an opportunity to actually be in action, right? If you look, and Terry has been sending me articles for months, as has Gary, right? And it's just one thing after another thing after another thing. And every time a college or a university gets a plan in place, all right, well, now it's time to pull the rug out from underneath you. And if you want to make the analogy of, where businesses were, right? It used to be if you wanted to do any kind of, major release of functionality for software, that was 9, 12, 18 months, right? A good portion of that was spent up front doing the planning. Well, we quickly found out in that digital world that, 18 months, there's some new startup has already come out with better features than what we had. They've gone ahead, done an IPO, they've sold off for $100 million, and well, we just got our plan approved, right? And that's really no way to go ahead and operate. I have seen over the last, and I've had some educators who have pointed out to me that, we have been on a path since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? And there have been some very key points along the Industrial Revolution, right? When we had the Transportation Revolution, it actually resulted in a change in education, right? No longer was it small little, the schoolhouse, right? With a one-room schoolhouse. Now people could travel a little bit. Colleges were able to attract, students from all over the place, and they were able to start looking at expanding their prestige, right? And then you fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, where now we have the manufacturing revolution of, Henry Ford in the early 1900s, right? And once again, we see education has changed, right? To meet the needs that, right, the students of tomorrow are going to need to be part of our economy. Well, for the last 20 years, we have been on a digital revolution, right? Businesses, governments, hands down, agility is the way to go, right? And unfortunately, education got left behind, because I'm assuming when we started building software, and then we started, turning these approaches to building software into scalable frameworks, the money was in the business and government world, right? But the truth of the matter is that if we don't get education up to speed on agility, right, they're going to struggle in turning out students who are actually able to work in the agile environments that, essentially exist out there.
And Jeff, we have a question. Can you, I'll take the first part. And we got some echo somewhere, sorry. But can you elaborate on the alliances you're proposing? And yes, so the alliances we're looking at would be absolute minimum of 5. We think the optimal is 10 institutions, small liberal arts colleges coming together, and basically we would do a feasibility study of what makes sense for some kind of alliances around, back end operations, but also things like online teaching. There's various approaches you can take, but it would be very much customized to the organization or the institutions that we're working with. And so, yes, and creating consortium, there's different kinds of alliances that can happen, everything from mergers to just consortiums to sharing things around good practice. Yeah, having a consortium around good practices, I think, is very much a possibility, but it depends on the situation. And so it's very much a customized approach to developing both the feasibility and, and implementing, whether it's, it could go, like I said, as far as a merger or just an alliance or just a consortium. not just because that's any of those are work. But Jeff, you want to jump in?
You know, and actually, I think it was your conversation of these.
Oh, hold on, you're something's going on with your audio.
Oh, hold on. How about now?
You're still getting weird feedback.
Okay, hold on 1 minute.
Sorry about that. It's the Zoom. Always an issue. Especially lately, I seem to be having issues with audio and video.
So I don't know if that's any better.
It's a lot better. Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, I may have to cut my video as well. We're having some storms pass through now, so that might be affecting it.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so anyways, when you started talking about alliances, right, in one of the first conversations that I participated in, I was fascinated because I saw it as, right, a real quick way of identifying an opportunity to reduce the overall expense of delivering certain key services, right? So within the business world and within large organizations, there's this concept of shared services. Right, they're the things that generally cost a lot of money, but we don't want to buy for every single business unit, right? Because we just keep buying the same thing. So we talk about maybe legal services, right? Or maybe we talk about, I worked at one organization where one of their shared services was their customer call center operations. So they had several lines of business, all which use one underlying call center operations. Right? So that everybody can now make sure that we have the best possible call center, right? Instead of different business units having to, well, we only have this much budget, so, you know, we'll make a call center that's this good, right? So there is that concept immediately, you know, manifested itself when you started talking about these alliances. It's like, well, where could the educational sector, where could colleges that are serving, you know, regional areas, how could they leverage that, you know, to truly maximize the delivery of value back to every student, which at the end of the day, if we get out the most amount of value out of every dollar we put into our system, that's operating at the highest level of efficiency. Right? And it changes the numbers, and especially when you combine it with the things that we see in the College Viability Act, right? It's a real interesting approach to how we would do it in the business world.
Yep.
Right? Like, why couldn't we do it?
Yeah, and sorry, we're getting a little echo too, but I want to put in the I'm going to put in the chat for everybody. Share that one to everyone. Oh, sorry. I'm going to put the link to a book, which is actually by the president of Lyon College, that also talks about the role of alliances and collaborations. And I apologize, I meant to put the info from our article in there as well, because that kind of goes into what we consider the 5 key components. I sent it to Jeffrey and not to everybody. So there's that. So if anybody else has questions, please feel free to jump in. But I was heartened to see in the book that I just posted in there that this idea has been floating around higher ed, excuse me, for a while, the idea of consolidation. And if we think about the broader business world, we've seen several different consolidations that have happened over time, and whether it's in the software world or various industries. And so I think that we're seeing this trend happening clearly in higher ed, and but one of the reasons we're kind of defending higher ed, and especially the small private liberal arts colleges, is there is a space in the in the broader industry for these small private liberal arts colleges. I truly believe they are critical because, for one thing, I mean, if you look at just the location of small private liberal arts colleges. A lot of them are in places that are, where they're really needed. They might be, a kind of a linchpin in their community in terms of, bringing students in and economic activity and so on. And so, I think that's something really critical to think about is, and I also believe that, as demographics change, I think small private liberal arts colleges are really great places. They're not for everybody, but they're amazing places for students who might have, want to have that smaller class size and a greater connection with faculty. But anyway, so Jeff, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. And I know you deal with these questions all the time, but, why should, we have structures in place in higher ed, right? We know how to do strategic planning. Why is Agile a better way for us to function?
Sure, and it's a fair question, and you're right. It is a question we get asked all the time as transformation coaches. In the business world, we already have a process for managing our work. What's so great about, agility and really one of the things to consider is that Agile, its focus is on the delivery of value. So whereas if you look at a lot of the traditional project management approaches, they may be talking about, okay, well, we need to manage budget. So we're going to focus on the manager, or we need to control risk. So we're going to develop a framework that allows us to manage and control risk all along the way, so that we are in a better situation, maybe because we're under, government scrutiny, or we are in a highly regulated industry, or, we don't want to get fined, we don't want to upset our customers, whatever it is. But it really wasn't until, 20 something years ago when people really started asking the question of, well, what if we started focusing on the delivery of value and joy, right? What if our focus was on delighting our customers and not on putting money in our pockets? Is it possible that, the money will just end up in our pockets, right? If all we did was deliver the highest quality, and it really kind of grew out of what we saw in the 70s and 80s in the auto manufacturing world, with the lean system thinking, when the US auto manufacturers could not keep up with Japan, right? And they, for the life of them, couldn't even understand why they couldn't keep up with Japan, right? And it was, if you go to the late 70s, a whole group of leaders from, the big auto manufacturers went over to Japan, and they saw that the people closest to the problems were solving the problem. And they couldn't understand. It's like, wait, I'm the boss. I need to have all the answers. But yeah, if you're the boss and you have all the answers, you're only one person. We can only move as fast as you can move, right? How about you be a leader, right? And you create people who understand your vision, understand and are aligned on your goal and your objectives for the organization, because that's what we want from leaders, is to give us that, where are we trying to get to? What's our North Star, right? And then make sure that as the people who have signed up to get us there, we have everything that we need to be successful, right? They've done a lot of sociology and economic studies, and a lot of universities. Carnegie Mellon was a big part of one of the studies that they went and they looked at what are some of the motivating factors that unlock the true potential of knowledge workers. So first of all, what's a knowledge worker? Knowledge worker is anybody whose job requires just a little bit of thinking, right? So if you're not doing the same thing over again in manufacturing, and you actually have to solve any kind of problem, you're a knowledge worker. And there was this belief in management for years that if you want to motivate any worker, all you had was you had carrot and you had stick, right? And so they couldn't understand why that was not motivating people whose job required the ability to problem solve, right? And so they just kept doing these studies, and what they kept finding time and time again, that there were actually three things that unlocked, the true motivation of knowledge workers. And those are giving them some autonomy over how they solve their problems, giving them, the opportunity to gain mastery over, their skills, and then giving them a purpose. Why are we even here? If you give them those three things, they'll work beyond your wildest dreams. And the proof that they kept showing to you time and time again is you look at all the hundreds of people whose job it was full-time developing software packages like, Microsoft Office. What do they do in their spare time? They go out and they contribute their time to developing shareware like LibreOffice, which does all the same thing but better than Microsoft Office, and they do it for free, right? Because no one tells them what to do. They get to decide what they want to work on. No one tells them how to solve it. They just all agree on what the standards are, and they're all committed to a common goal. And they don't even have to pay them to do that work.
Right. Yeah, and as Brian notes, with COVID, but I mean, I don't want to focus too much on COVID because the reality is, we've had to be agile in higher ed for a while, or we should have been. And when I think about the accreditation processes I've been through, it seems like that's the direction we're being pushed in anyway. Because when I was going through the accreditation processes at Menlo College, the big push was, bringing in, and I want to focus for just a minute on the issue of stakeholders. Because one of the things that we really got pushed on was to make sure, and the accreditors, when we had our site visit, wanted to make sure they talked to all our stakeholders. What are the students saying? How do they feel about what's happening on the campus? Our faculty, do they feel empowered? And I think one of the things I really appreciate about this is and you haven't mentioned it yet, but it's about empowerment, right? It's being able to say that, yes, the faculty, and that's one of the things I actually spent the next 2 years working on, was getting the faculty empowered to understand why, for example, we needed to have course and program and, institutional outcomes. What is the outcome that we want to have? And it seems like a very basic thing, but, we aren't trained to do that. And one of the reasons I started the Center for Higher Education Leadership is because as a professor, and as a grad student, I wasn't ever really trained to, what should be put into a syllabus. I mean, I knew what to put into a syllabus, right? But, things like basic pedagogy and what our course learning outcomes should be and so on. And so I had to learn a lot of that myself. And learn about, instructional design. I know we have some folks on here who do that kind of thing, but, I think that empowerment is kind of critical to this, and it also helps to deal with, you and I have talked about, how people might object to these processes coming into place. But I think if you come at it from the perspective that, look, we are trying to help you, be empowered and to be making those decisions that are then going to help us create the change. So I guess I would encourage you to use the term empowerment, because I think that's something that particularly faculty can engage in.
Yeah, and it's critical. It's critical, right? I mean, at the end of the day, right, we have a saying in the business world of agile transformation that there's very few things that will stand in the way of a committed agile team, right? Why? Because they're aligned on a common objective, and they're willing to try anything, and they're not afraid of failure as they go ahead and learn what it is they need to learn to solve the problem. Right. And if you take that approach, right, and now you go, okay, now we need to respond quickly. Well, then we need to change where decisions get made. What are the things that slow down our decision-making processes, and how do we eliminate those things?
Right. I think people feel like higher ed, because we're so structured. You have the president and the provost and the other vice presidents, and then you have the deans, and then assistant deans and associate deans and faculty, and then students, and then of course staff. So we have all these different components that have to work together, and it seems like a complex system, but I'm curious how you look at that from an agile perspective.
So thank you. Great. I'll just knock that out.
I'm throwing you some softballs.
Well, let me get out of the way. Oh, yeah. Really, so the basic approach that we take is, well, we get that it takes a lot of different skills to do anything in a university or a college setting. But what it's really important to identify is, what are some of those big value things that we're looking to deliver to our students, right? Because
Mhm.
once we understand what those are, right, then we can ask the question, okay, great. What are the things that kick those events off? What's the trigger, right? Because once we understand the trigger, right, well, when this happens, it kicks off this whole, all this activity happens, and then we end up with a brand new student registered at the college, right? Whatever
Right.
that is, that whole flow, right? What we do is
Yeah.
we say, okay, great. Now that we understand the trigger and the value, right? The value, new college registered, there's value. I'm now a student starting on my educational journey, there's value, right? And we go, okay, great. What are all the skills that I might need in order to deliver that value? And so I'm going to share a screen, and if anybody likes, I actually created this as a, where is my chat? And I can share the link. This is a mural board. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Mural, this is a tool that really has been a lifesaver for the Agile and Agile transformation community in the time of COVID, because we're very used to working in rooms full of people, very interactive. It's very tactile. We always have stickies. I don't know if you can see it. There we go. We have stickies. They're all over the place. They're over walls and windows, right? We're terrible house guests, right? But, not being able to be in rooms with people, we've had to learn how to pivot. And again, because we take this approach of, well, we'll just try anything until we learn how to solve the problem, right? It took us a little bit to get to something like Mural. But this is an exercise that I do with some of my corporate clients, right? Where they're looking to understand, how is it that we deliver a specific amount of value to a particular group of customers, right? What's the trigger? What's all the systems that our value floats through, right? Who are all the people involved in managing those systems and workflow? Because once we can start to identify that, what we actually, in the business terminology, what we call that is a value stream, right? It's how value flows through our organization, usually a business or government sector, and how we then get to make money as a business, right? And so we found that when you organize along the delivery of value and you get everybody together working collaboratively in teams or teams of teams, all focused on the delivery of that value, you eliminate all the wait time. Or let me rephrase that. You have the potential to eliminate as much wait time as you can identify, right? And at the end of the day, wait time is money, right? We have found that, in a traditional thing, whatever that small thing is that we do to do business, we wait more time than we're actually in action doing things. Means that more than half of the costs that it takes to do something is caught up in it's just sitting there waiting for the next person to do something. So imagine if you could start identifying and recouping 20, 30% waste in some of your processes, right? Because all you've done is you've realigned and you've formed teams that allow the value to flow all the way through. So what I did is I put together an example, and you're welcome to join us on the board if you like. What I did is, and I'm still learning a lot about education, so I could probably use Terri's help a little bit in this, but if we were looking at the skills, right, that we have, marketing, student services, legal services, facility services, admissions, processing, faculty, administrative, library services, leadership services, financial, housing, food services. Then we have the various employees that we have in our, whether it's our alliance or it is our, small college or even within a department, right, that we need to deliver all this value. We can start to understand who is it that has what skills, right? And we can visually map that, right? So, you'll see that, for example, Lisa, she is very, oh, by the way, the key for this is green is very strong, yellow is a medium skill, and red is a low skill. If it has nothing in the box, they have 0 skill in that area. Okay? So Lisa, while she's very strong in marketing and she is very weak in student services, she's also, has some experience doing administrative work, right? But if we look along our services, we'll notice that we only have one person, Padmaja, who knows anything about legal, right? So we can start to, as we look at who has what capabilities and what skills that they can bring to a team, we start to see that, oh, okay, maybe there's people who, or skills that we will not be able to have on every team if we were to break all of these people into 3 teams. Some people might end up on what we've discussed before, a shared services team, right? These are business services where we don't have a lot of people who share those skills. So we need to make them available to all the different teams who are going to require them in order to be successful and continue to move the flow of value through the system. So what would be a good experiment to run to see if we could build some teams that could do stuff for students based on the skills that we have here? Could we do marketing? Could we do, let's say, getting new students for the fall semester next year? Maybe. Okay.
Myself. Actually, it's interesting, Jeff, because I saw, I can't remember, it might have been from Brian, but an article or something that talked about this, like the admissions process and how complex it can be. And I can just testify to that, you
right,
have,
so,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna ask, so like in the admissions process, so this is already someone who's a student, I'm assuming, right? I'm now coming into admissions. Is that?
No, I actually, even just the whole process, starting from recruitment to getting that student on campus. And so, we know there's, you start, reaching out to students once they've taken the PSAT. My son, who's just starting, he took the PSAT last year, and he started getting the bombardment of brochures and leaflets and so on from different colleges. And now he's going into his junior year. And this is another case where, we have to be agile, because all of a sudden campus visits aren't possible, right?
Yes.
So who do we talk to about, so the admissions team has to get together and talk about, okay, how do we, change our processes, because we can't get students on campus to see the campus when they're in their junior year like we normally would. And we have to start doing things more, through video. We might have some, Zoom meetings like this to bring students in. But, so who, maybe we need to start leaning more heavily on our IT folks.
Sure.
Maybe there's a marketing team that knows how to do videos. Maybe we have to send, if we can, send people out still, to do recruitment. But yeah, I think that's, one process that is definitely being impacted right now.
Yeah, and so what, from an agile mindset, right, what an agile mindset would encourage us to do is to say, okay, great, how do we identify, first of all, we need to identify all the different skills that we're going to need in order to, do the admissions process, right? Everything from recruitment to day one on campus, right? It's that trigger, right? You mentioned a great trigger. Oh, the SAT is a trigger. Okay, great. We know what our trigger is, right? Then we get to start having the conversations. Okay, what's the workflow, right? What would a student's journey be through that process of, okay, I just registered for the PSAT and I took it, or I just registered for it. I don't know what the trigger actually is. But now all of a sudden I start getting marketing material, emails, things start showing up in my, in my mailbox. What are some of the things that we're going to need in order to get that student all the way through to, okay, they're now a student on day one, right? So how would we build leveraging these skills? And you've made a great point. So one of the first things we learn when we look at building teams in this structure is it helps us identify the skills we don't have, right? I purposely left out IT. Why? Because I come from a heavy IT background. I didn't want to show preference. So
Mhm.
I left them out, right? You were the first person to call it. Hey, we may need IT here, right?
Mhm.
Because we can't do face-to-face,
Mhm.
right? We can't have them come to the, so it's that approach where we bring together these cross-functional teams that everybody's bringing their own experience, again, results in a quicker turnaround on a solution because you're realizing that, oh, face-to-face, campus visits, very important. And me not realizing that it is, very important because I only see things through the Agile perspective. I don't understand the full process, right, of
Mhm.
getting a student on board.
Right. Yeah, and obviously that's where we bring in the people who know. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting case though because I was just thinking, for example, summer melt is a big problem for admissions. So you get somebody, they've committed, they pay the deposit, but then how can we make sure that they actually show up, given that, especially for a lot of institutions that are going online. So again, it needs, you need to have strategies, but it's not that we aren't thinking in Agile terms. I think, for a lot of people, they hear Agile and say, oh, I'm already thinking that way, right?
Yeah.
It's just putting a name to it, because when we were having issues with admissions, we decided, well, what if we offered a mini course? And actually I've heard a lot of people talking about, since a lot of students, especially this summer, they haven't been able to take on summer jobs, things like that. And so they've been offering, hey, here's a course you can take over the summer. It will let you take it for free. And then, you can jump into things in the fall. So I think there's, a lot of ways to get creative. And for those of you, yes, Mary's saying reducing wait time can also free up people to focus on learning new things, finding other things to help increase value for students. Yeah, I agree with that. Is if you have, and believe me, this is something I struggled with as a provost, because especially when we were trying to work on, some of the different things we were being required to do by the accreditors, I tried to set up, so there's some different tools for tracking things, and so I'm just curious, because it's hard to, as the leader, to necessarily know where are we at with this particular thing. I mean, so how do you guys manage that in the Agile scenario?
Sure. And so first of all, so transparency is one of the cornerstone values, right? We
Yes.
believe that transparency goes both ways, both from leadership down to the staff, right? And I don't care where in the staff you are. If you're I'm sorry to use this analogy, but if you paint the lines on the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
You understand what the vision of leadership is in the organization. And conversely, we have transparency all the way up. At any time, we have a simple, easy way to go ahead and find out what anybody is doing. But what we find that as we develop as lean agile leaders, it becomes less about finding out where people are, and people actually bring to you their done work. So we
Mm-hmm.
have this concept of a demo, right? It used to be that in the traditional waterfall project world, you have all these toll gates that you have to go through. You design your plan, great. Everybody reviews and approves your plan. Your plan's reviewed and approved. Yay,
Woo-hoo.
right? Now we come up with our design. The design's been reviewed and approved. Yay, right? We still have nothing. We still haven't delivered anything. All we have are tons and tons of documents, right? Now we do some development. All right, we're actually writing software or building a product. Okay, or creating a service. All right, we're doing that. Well, now we've done that. Okay, now we have to test it. We have to validate it. And then once it's been validated, we have to create all these documents that show it's been validated. And then we get those reviewed and approved, because at the end of the day, it's the documents that matter for some reason, right? And everybody's signature that's important, right? And we follow all these steps. And then finally, at the end of the day, we can turn it over and give it over to our customer. So here you go. What do you think? And they're waiting patiently for us, or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they've either moved on or they haven't. Right? When we talk about, how we bring, agility and the mindset to bear, it really becomes about, creating the opportunity to bring a finished product back and get feedback from the customer as soon as we can. And we look to minimize those time frames, right? We're talking about on a small thing, 2 weeks later, hey, we've made a simple change to our website. Can you give us feedback? Does it serve your need?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
right. Yeah, and that could be, hey, we've decided to offer this summer course that we haven't, we were able to put this together, here
right.
it's just a course we would normally offer during, maybe for the first time you do it, it's a course you offer during the school year. You say, hey, students who are hanging out over the summer, here's a free opportunity. And you get them hooked in, maybe add some outreach to it. I can just see how the process could be developed. Yeah.
So so it's funny you mentioned, right? I had a conversation with a small religious university out in South Florida area today. And, they were noticing in their business school that if you're a finance major, they have an opportunity to do something. If you're an accounting major, you get to volunteer and do taxes for people in underserved community, right? They had stuff for everybody, but for management. Everybody but for management. And we were talking, he's like, well, what can we do? I'm like, well, why couldn't we do something just like what we do, right? How about we come in and we help some of the other students who are out there doing all these things?
Thanks, Mary.
And again, it's that opportunity to get a meaningful experience so that when I leave college, right, now I know how to work in teams. I know how to work towards an objective, right? I know how to work in collaboration with people. I know how to be transparent. I know how to celebrate my own failures, right? And I don't treat failure like this big taboo, right? From the fixed mindset, right? You either know how to do it or you don't know how to do it. But really, we pull from the growth mindset. Well, just haven't figured out how to do it yet. Have to fail a couple more times. Now I've learned.
Yeah, and it's interesting because actually the other reason I felt an affinity for this approach is because I'd spent a lot of time learning about the design thinking process, which is basically the same thing. Came out of the same, software development and so on. But design thinking, at least in this area, has taken things by storm. And we see it. So Menlo College is mostly a business college. They also have psychology programs. But, I think it's interesting that, we talk about a lot of these approaches, including design thinking. But we kind of, at least, in my experience, we've treated them as kind of something on the sides. Now, Stanford has, their whole design, what does they call it? Anyway, they have a whole, faculty around design thinking. But I don't think that's the case for the typical college or university, and yet I know a lot of business colleges. For example, my first exposure to Agile and a Scrum, we haven't even talked about Scrums, was when I was doing a conference or a workshop with the Penn Graduate School of Education. That's a very innovative and entrepreneurial program, and so I just think it's interesting that we have these elements out there they're based in higher ed to a certain extent, but they haven't kind of made their way into the broader higher ed ecosphere, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I find it ironic, right? If you want to find some really good books on agility and the value it brings to the business world, just go to some good business colleges, and their professors have written the books.
Yes.
And exactly. Yet, how do we bring it into the classroom, right? How do we incorporate it into the curriculum, right? Or how do we actually run our organization, our institution, in an agile fashion? Right? Those are new and foreign, and it'll never work here. We've been doing it this way for 70 years or 100 years, right? But it's the same thing, right? I mean, one of my first large scale, I'm not going to use the name, but one of my first, large scale agile transformations was in a 200-year-old company, right? That had been and was still very, very successful. But what they were clear on was that they were not as nimble as they were when they started, right? And now to do the littlest thing, there was just so much baggage. I think, Brian, you're on the call. He calls it institutional scar tissue. I love it.
I was actually going to ask Brian to jump in because I know he's had experience
But it really
on
is.
the.
You know, something happens and we make this rule or policy. And now years go by. And the thing that happened is never going to happen again. But now we live like the policy or the rule is the most important thing. And we don't even know why we do it anymore. But that's the way it's done. And we've always done it that way. And it adds, and Brian, jump in anytime, it adds a tremendous amount of hidden cost to every single thing, every single person in the institution does. Like if you really think it costs X number of dollars to deliver any amount of value, I promise you, you have not even begun to look at the hidden costs.
Yeah, I feel like I'm being summoned.
You are.
Oh, it's excellent. Thank you. So we've actually, yeah, I'd refer to it as organizational scar tissue, and it's because all these things we try to guard against that has burned us in the past, we put a policy or procedure in place, and that act of doing it in itself is okay, but it's like small things add up over time, right? And eventually you have a big onerous process that costs you tons and tons of money that you don't even know why you're doing it, and you just become blind to it. So we're actually finding hidden costs in organizations that are, you know, the last two that we've worked with, we've found in excess of $90,000 per person per year.
Yep, I believe it. And so can you, I know you had sent us some articles about these kinds of things, and can you just give a small example of what that looks like in an institution?
Okay, here's an example. One of the larger ones we found, this isn't one that's specific to education, but it's one that we found recently nonetheless, is that we had a number of institutional frameworks that had been implemented simultaneously. And in the process of doing so, it caused a lot of confusion. And one individual was spending fully half of her time explaining roles and responsibilities to people. Well, that's a lot of money. It came out to right around that in and of itself was about $46,000. So a lot of other things that we see is the time it takes to sort through information or hunt down information that individuals should have access to, right? That's another one. And then a huge waste that we find is not fully developing human potential. And, you know, really the developing human potential is the primary source of long-term viability and value. So.
Yep, I agree. I think you're right on target with that one, because I think we get, you know, especially when it comes to paperwork and things like that, I think we tend to get caught up in that quite a bit. But you know, a lot of it revolves around documentation. And you know, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with documentation, but I think part of the problem, and I ran into this one in my experiences in higher ed, is we're not necessarily looking at the outcome. And that's, I think, where mission and values have to be constantly a constant reminder, because I think if we think about the outcomes we want to see, and then put everything through that lens, and that's, I think, why accreditors have been pushing so hard on what do you think students are supposed to be learning, and are they actually learning it, you know, and what should we expect a student who comes through your program at the end of that? What can they do? What have they learned? Where can they work? You know, I mean, we've just been getting really pushed on that a lot, and you know, I think it's partly because you know, are we really putting our energies in the right direction? And the only way to know that is by knowing what is the outcome you want to see, and are you getting that outcome, and can you, you know, and you don't necessarily have to quantify it, but we should be able to have some sense of understanding of what we want a student to look like when they leave our college. So
it's a struggle too, right? Because you're trying to educate individuals who are trying to fill jobs that don't exist to solve problems that we don't even know are problems yet.
Right. Indeed. And Mary's comment, for those who can't see it, that sometimes these additional processes, they say, are reducing risk, actually increase our risk and the estimate of being able to meet our goals, really.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that we don't take into account. If you're doing a SWOT analysis, one of the things I think we should be thinking about is what is the risk of not meeting our goal for our students, of them, what is the risk of a student not graduating, and why does, what's the factors playing into that, and how can, our processes be updated to reduce those kinds of risks. So for those who have to leave, we understand. It's we're already at a little after 12, but if you can stick around, we'll continue the conversation for a bit. So thanks so much, Brian, for jumping in. I'm kind of put you on the spot, but I know that we have some good examples from higher ed of how things can be done in more innovative ways. I always, when people ask me, I say, well, look at I know a lot of people may not appreciate the personality of the president of ASU, but he's done a lot of innovative things. So ASU has been really on the cutting edge of, becoming a more agile institution by, having interdisciplinary faculty teams, things like that. Southern New Hampshire University has, really focused on, older learners and ways to get them through in the most efficient way, as well as having their own physical campus and so on. And there's lots of other institutions that are really trying to use the latest tools. And I'm curious, Jeff, can you talk a little bit maybe about using, things like technology and tools to, help an institution become more flexible and agile, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the big, right, I mean, and there are so many tools out there that any organization, whether they're going through a transformation or they simply want to get more organized, right? They want to enhance collaboration even within the organization. There are so many tools out there. And, whenever I'm working in the corporate world and I'm speaking with leaders about, well, what tools should we get? That's always the first question that seems to come up is, what are the right tools for us to get? I'm always, provide them with a word of caution, which is, be careful about the tools that you choose up front, right? It's in the ideal state, we're identifying our process that works for us as, within our culture, within our context, that helps us meet the needs of our student body or in the business world, our customers, right? And ideally, we're going to find tools that support that. But regardless of the specific tools, there are some basic tools that every organization is going to need in order to be successful, whether or not they're agile or not, but simply in these times that we're living in right now, right? In the times of COVID, where all of a sudden you have to, within a couple of days, pivot from, well, we thought we were going to be in class to now we're all going to be at home, right? And so the key tools that any educational institution are going to need are some sort of communication tool, right? Whether it's a platform like Zoom or BlueJeans or Cisco's WebEx or any of the number of different platforms that are out there. But you need some way to communicate, right? We say that in the ideal state, the highest and most effective form of communication is face-to-face in a room with a whiteboard, right? The least effective way to communicate is I will type it up in a document, print it out, and hand it to you, right? So obviously we're not going to, in COVID, we're not going to get close to the ideal. So how close can we get? Well, right now, Terry, you and I, we can see each other. We have we have a collaboration tool if we needed to, right? So in addition to a communication tool, we need some sort of collaboration tool, somewhere where we can share our ideas, where we can brainstorm, something like a mural, a Miro, it's something that this particular tool offers a lot of flexibility on the different things that you can do on it. But as Agilists, it simply allows us to create virtual stickies, which in and of itself is great, right? So we can put stickies on things again, and we feel like we're in a room with people. So those become important tools. You also need a way to track and keep your work visible, right? So if from Kanban, which is a delivery methodology under the Agile umbrella, which really focuses on the flow of work and maximizing how much work you can get through your system, it leverages what it's called a big visible information radiator, which is really nothing more than a big board covered with stickies that tells everybody who wants to see it, this is exactly what we're working on. This is exactly where it is in our process, right? You don't even have to ask us. You can just go get the information yourself. And there are a lot of these work management tools out there digitally that you can use. The big companies, Rally and, now I'm just drawing it was owned by Broadcom, but now, Atlassian. These are companies that offer these ticketing services, systems that allow you to just basically break apart your work and track it as you go through. It is really important that the tool that you're going to use to track your work allows all the work to roll up and down. So we always want to start with our initiatives or our goals, those big things that we're getting from leadership. Hey, we want to expand our enrollment by 30% by next year. That's impossible. Great. That's the kind of North Star we want. Something that we can't even achieve. How close can we get to that? Right? And then we start breaking that down into the things that, at each level we think we're going to do in order to get us there. And then we keep retrospecting and reflecting. Are we moving in the right direction or not? What are we going to change? What are we going to try next? But that work will, it will have that parent-child relationship all the way up and down the system. So to answer the question you asked before, right, at any point, if we have one of these work management tools, any leader in the organization can go in and see where any team is on any particular thing that's being worked on. They can see it at the team level, at the department level, at the institution level, or rolled all the way up as to how we're progressing on our big
That's
items.
exactly. That's what I was coming back to is if we're going to develop anything from, if we're doing a merger, if we're doing an alliance, if we're doing a consolidation, whatever it may be, you want to be able to work across institutions. And so,
see how the work is progressing, right?
Right.
Because at any time, if things change, we may need to pivot, right? And, or we may learn something new, right? A lot of the articles I'm reading right now that are coming out of a lot of colleges are based on the latest findings from CDC, health work, advisors. We've come up with this thing. Well, great. I'm noticing those are changing about every 2 weeks, those guidelines. So, okay, we need teams that can, within 2 weeks or so, pivot everything on campus.
Yeah.
Right? Do we have that? Is everybody ready? Let's go. From an agility standpoint, right, as coaches, we're all ready. The teams that we would support, that we would coach in the approach, they would be, let's do it. Change everything. We're ready to come up with a new plan, right? Because what they tend to realize is, going back to, I think it was General Eisenhower who said, is that, it's the ability to plan that's important. The plan itself, it's practically useless, right? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. Right? So you need the ability to plan, right? And the ability to keep planning and replanning and doing it in a very strategic fashion so that it always aligns with getting you towards that North Star, whatever that is, to be the top-rated liberal arts private college in this area, or part of an alliance that, produces students who go out and change the world, whatever that vision is that the institution or the alliance has for themselves, and then turning their staff and faculty loose, right? And giving them those three things, right? Here's your purpose, right? Now go figure out how you're going to get us there, and tell me what you need to help you as a leader, right? And we're going to keep making sure that we have it, and we're going to make sure that our student body knows that that's why we're here, because that feeds the machine. right? We want their feedback as well. We want their parents to know, right? We want everybody to know that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can tell you as a parent of a son who is at a small liberal arts college in Portland, Oregon, I'm watching very closely how their teams are working, you know, and how they're communicating with the parents, and they actually, I think, are doing a good job. But you know, frankly, anybody can do a better job of communication because you know it's hard, and you don't want to give people too much information, and then you know, especially in a constantly changing environment. And so I'm finding, you know, I'm kind of jumping in and defending, you know, these people who are dealing with a you know, constant change and,
Sure.
and
I
trying
mean,
to
yeah, we're having the same issue here, and my kids are still in, my oldest is still in high school, and I have one in middle school, and it's, you need to decide now, is your child going to be in for the whole year or not? I'm like, well, that's a terrible way to do this. All right. Why do I have to decide now? Now everything's terrible. You know, if I'm going to decide now, I'm going to decide based on now everything is terrible. Right. And so, you know, my ex-wife, she was like, what do we do? What do we do? I'm like, well, you know what? I mean, look, for our youngest, because of his special needs, it's better for him to, as much as possible, be around other people. But because of, you know, because of her medical condition, he is not going anywhere near people yet. Right. You know, but we had to keep the option open. So they forced our hand. So yeah, our son will be going, you know, the AB days in school. Unfortunately, he's not going to make it for the first few weeks because somebody in-house is not feeling well. You know, and we're not going to subject ourselves to, you know, we're going to see what happens in the first couple of weeks. So far, all the schools that we've been watching in the news, they open up COVID in the first couple of weeks.
Yeah,
it tends to not go well a couple of weeks later.
Yeah.
They're shutting down, and I have zero reason to believe that they have any better information in our school district than they do anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Right? We just don't know enough.
Right. Indeed. All right. Well, we're losing folks, and I know we've been going on for a while, and we're getting into our own personal stories. But you know, hey, sometimes personal stories are good ways to you know, identify issues and so on. So thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks, Brian. I think Brian had to jump off too, but for jumping in. And yeah, this has been fun, and this is being recorded, so feel free to share with your networks. And we'll also do, I'm going to give Jeff and Dory a little job to do a quick write-up, and I can add to it, and then we'll get that out there to everybody. So thanks again. I always learn something new when I get into these discussions, and we will catch everybody later. I'll let you end it, Jeff.
Yeah, really. Thank you very much for the opportunity and the platform. It's you know, for us, it really does speak to why we're here. Right? We're looking to change the way education is done. Mostly it's for selfish reasons. I have young children who are going to eventually have to make money of their own sooner, hopefully, rather than later. And they can only do that if they have the right skills. And I can tell as a coach, as a consultant, I always found it so amusing that when the new class of graduates would come out of the most prestigious business schools and join any of the Fortune 500 companies where I was working, the first thing they did is put them into a 3-month, this is how you actually do work class. And I'm like, oh my God, how much college debt do you have that you can't even set up an email? You know, or you don't know an etiquette for setting up an invitation.
Yeah.
But okay, you know, congratulations, that's a nice degree.
Believe me, I've heard that from, you know, former students who are like, you know, and I know students who've gone through, I mean, I have a former mentee who went through one of those programs where he had to learn, you know, how to be an employee, you know.
Yeah,
we should be doing this in
crazy,
college.
right?
But anyway, that's a whole nother, that's the next webinar. Just kidding.
Right, yeah.
Actually, before I let go, our next webinar is coming up on the 27th. We're going to be discussing diversity, equity, and inclusion with a great panel. So be sure to join us for that. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.